They say silence is empty, but when it comes from a woman who knows her worth, silence is a force. It's not weakness, it's not retreat, it's not submission, it's control, it's clarity. It's a weapon of wisdom forged in the fires of experience. There comes a point in a woman's life when she no longer needs to explain herself, no longer seeks validation, no longer feels the urge to convince the world of her truth. That's when her silence begins to speak louder than anything she could say. It's in her stillness that her power begins to shine. Subtle, calm, and undeniable. She's been through the chaos. She's had her heart broken, her voice dismissed, her value questioned. But she didn't crumble. She watched, she learned, and she rose. Not louder, but stronger. Not in a fury, but in focus. The world often tells women to fight louder, speak faster, and constantly defend their existence. But the most dangerous woman isn't the one who yells. It's the one who chooses silence with purpose. Because she doesn't speak unless she means it. She doesn't argue, she decides. She doesn't react, she responds with intention. This silence isn't emptiness, it's mastery. It's the result of outgrowing noise, outlasting betrayal, and outsmarting chaos. It's the kind of silence that comes when a woman realizes she doesn't need to prove her power. It just is. She's no longer rattled by rumors, no longer shaken by opinions, no longer tempted by the urge to correct the false narratives people build about her, because she knows who she is. And she knows that silence is not the absence of voice, it is the presence of self. This is not about being passive, it's about being precise. It's about understanding that her energy is too sacred to be spilled in arguments that don't matter. She has learned to pause, not because she's afraid, but because she's wise. She doesn't scream her power, she embodies it. So when she walks into the room and says nothing, the air still changes. When she's quiet in the face of disrespect, it's not because she's letting it slide. It's because she's already made her decision. She's already closed that door in her heart, and she doesn't need to slam it shut for the world to hear. Her silence is thunder in disguise. This is what true power looks like. This is what happens when a woman stops performing and starts owning. This is what you're about to discover. The raw, unwavering, unshakable power of a woman's silence. And now, let's go deeper. The language beneath her silence. They say silence speaks louder than words. But a woman's silence, when it's not from fear or suppression but from strength and self-awareness, is something far more profound. It's not emptiness, it's not defeat. It's a calculated power that very few truly understand until they witness it. When a woman chooses silence, it's not because she has nothing to say, it's because she's done trying to explain herself to people who've already made up their minds. It's because she realizes her energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to her thoughts, emotions, or truths. That silence becomes her boundary, her shield, her statement. In a world where noise is constant, where opinions fly louder than truth, and arguments overshadow understanding, a silent woman stands out. She's not trying to win every fight. She's not in a race to be heard. She's not reacting to every insult or explaining every step. Why? Because she knows who she is. And that unshakable sense of self makes her untouchable. People often confuse silence with weakness. But real silence, the kind born from strength, is anything but. It's a weapon. A silent force that unnerves those who seek control. It makes them uneasy because they can't predict her next move. They can't decipher her emotions. They don't know what she's thinking. And that mystery, her refusal to be readable, is terrifying to those who feed off drama, chaos, or control. She knows she doesn't need to defend herself in every conversation. She doesn't need to correct every false assumption. She doesn't argue to prove her worth, because she's already proven it, to herself. She doesn't need validation. Her silence says, I don't need this. I've already outgrown this. I'm past this. In her silence, she reclaims her peace. She protects her growth. She guards her transformation. And most importantly, she listens. No, to the world outside, but to the wisdom within. That inner voice becomes clearer when the external noise fades. In silence, she finds her truth, her direction, her power. And that power, it can't be manipulated. It can't be threatened. It can't be controlled. Because a woman who is quiet by choice is dangerous in the best way. She's calculated. She's aware. She's rising. Not loudly, but unshakably. Her silence isn't her absence. It's her preparation, her transformation, her evolution. And when she does finally speak, it won't be to explain herself. It'll be to change the game entirely. Her silence reveals her wisdom. There's something undeniably powerful about a woman who doesn't rush to speak, doesn't beg to be heard, and doesn't react to every provocation. Her silence isn't about fear. It isn't about weakness. It's a deliberate choice, a choice made from a place of strength and deep self-awareness. The world misunderstands this quiet power. Many think she's passive. Many assume she has nothing to say. But they fail to realize that her silence is not the absence of voice. It's the presence of wisdom. A woman who knows her worth does not waste energy on noise. She doesn't argue with those determined to misunderstand her. She doesn't chase validation from people who can't see her value. She doesn't need to defend her character when her life already speaks louder than words ever could. That's what makes her silence sacred. It's purposeful, it's strategic, it's refined by experience. Every scar she carries, every betrayal she's endured, every tear she's ever shed has taught her that not everything deserves a response. She's learned that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, and that the quiet ones, the ones who observe before they speak, are the ones who carry the real power. Her silence isn't retreat, it's readiness, it's reflection, it's a shield forged from 1,000 storms she's already survived. In a society that demands constant noise, where everyone wants to be seen, heard and acknowledged, a silent woman becomes a mystery. She unnerves those who cannot understand her stillness. Because she doesn't perform for approval, she doesn't need to. Her power doesn't scream, it radiates. People underestimate a woman who doesn't fight for the spotlight. But they forget that a queen doesn't need to announce herself when she enters a room. Her presence commands attention. And a wise woman, secure in herself, doesn't yell to be respected. Her dignity does the talking. Her consistency earns the reverence. Her peace becomes her presence. Silence is how she sets her boundaries. It's how she withdraws from toxicity. It's how she heals herself in a world that often doesn't know how to love a woman with depth. It's how she conserves her energy for the battles that matter, not the ones designed to distract or drain her. She chooses to remain silent, not because she doesn't have fire in her soul, but because she knows that fire is sacred, and not everything deserves to be burned with it. The world may not always understand the woman who chooses silence, but it always feels her power. She walks through life not to impress, but to express peace. She doesn't need to prove her intelligence, her worth or her strength. She's already embodied all three. And that is what makes her unstoppable. A silent woman is not someone to ignore. She's someone to respect, because when she finally does speak, every word hits like truth, sharp, deliberate, and unforgettable. The weapon of inner clarity. A woman's silence doesn't mean she's weak. It means she's listening closely, observing everything, feeling the weight of the room without saying a word. While the world rushes to speak, she watches. While others argue to be right, she reflects to understand. And that's where her real power begins, in her ability to pause, gather strength, and choose her words and actions with intention. Silence gives her something rare, clarity. When she stops explaining herself to those who are committed to misunderstanding her, she reclaims her energy. When she walks away from the noise of validation seeking and instead sits with herself, she finds answers no one else can give. Her stillness is not inactivity, it's strategy, it's wisdom. It's how she sharpens her mind, calms her spirit, and tunes out the lies the world tries to sell her. Society has taught many to mistake loudness for leadership, but real leaders don't need to shout. Real queens don't need to prove themselves with every step. Their presence alone carries power. A woman who knows her worth doesn't waste time trying to convince others of it. Her silence is not submission, it is a choice. And that choice is rooted in deep self-trust. In relationships, her silence speaks louder than her pleas. If she's been disrespected, betrayed, or undervalued, her silence becomes a mirror. It reflects the truth to those who thought she'd never walk away. And when she does walk, she does it with grace, dignity, and a calm that burns far deeper than any argument ever could. She doesn't engage in every battle, because not every battle is worth her energy. Silence is how she tells the world, I'm choosing peace over performance. I don't need your validation to feel valuable. And in doing so, she becomes unshakable. Her decisions come from a place of power, not pressure. She no longer needs to speak just to beat all. Is seen because she already sees herself. Let them wonder what she's thinking. Let them question her calm. Let them misunderstand her pause. That's the brilliance of it. While they waste time underestimating her, she is building, evolving, rising. And when she does speak again, her words will carry the weight of fire because they were forged in silence. She doesn't compete with noise. She becomes the storm that arrives without a sound, unexpected, undeniable, and unstoppable. Her silence isn't her absence, it's her presence intensified, her focus deepened, her power fully awake. So never doubt a silent woman, because the one who speaks little often feels deeply, thinks clearly, and moves deliberately. And that kind of woman, she changes everything, not with noise, but with presence. When her silence commands the room, a woman's silence isn't a void, it's a presence. When she chooses not to speak, it's not because she has nothing to say. It's because she's learned the value of restraint, the power in not reacting, the strength in not explaining herself to people who never intended to understand her in the first place. A woman in her power doesn't need to raise her voice to prove her point. She doesn't need to fight for attention or force people to see her. She knows who she is, and she carries that energy into every room she enters. People notice her not because she demands to be noticed, but because her energy speaks louder than words ever could. Silence becomes her weapon, not the kind that wounds, but the kind that disarms, the kind that makes people lean in, not out of fear, but out of awe. Because there's something magnetic about a woman who isn't desperate to be heard. She's grounded, she's complete, she's no longer running after anyone's approval. Her silence says, I choose peace over chaos. I choose my energy over your validation. In a noisy world that thrives on reactions, she has mastered the art of response. She doesn't get dragged into every conflict. She doesn't lower herself to pettiness. She knows when to speak and when to let silence do the talking. She's not cold, she's clear, she's not distant, she's discerning. And that clarity gives her unmatched authority. When a woman starts valuing her inner peace, her silence becomes intentional. She's not silent because she's weak. She's silent because her power is now internal. She has found her voice, but more importantly, she's found the wisdom to use it only when it matters most. In moments of tension, her silence is a mirror. It reflects truth. It forces others to face their actions, their motives, and their words. It removes the distraction of noise and centers everything on PR. Essence. She doesn't need to argue. She doesn't need to convince. Her stillness already speaks volumes. Silence also becomes her protection. It guards her from unnecessary exposure. She doesn't let everyone in. She doesn't reveal everything. Her silence is her boundary. A soft but firm line that separates what's sacred from what's not. Not everyone deserves access to her thoughts. Not everyone has earned the right to hear her truths. And when she does speak, people listen, because they know her words aren't for show. They're not impulsive. They come from a place of depth, reflection, and power. She doesn't scream. She doesn't beg. She doesn't chase. She observes. She decides. She leads. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with demand, but with certainty. Because the most powerful woman in the room isn't always the loudest. She's often the quiet one, the one whose silence echoes with confidence, wisdom, and strength. She speaks loudest when she says nothing at all. There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she no longer has to explain herself. She doesn't owe anyone her emotions, her reactions, or her justification. That moment is liberation, and it often comes wrapped in silence. A woman who has mastered the art of quiet strength doesn't need to raise her voice. Her absence speaks louder than her presence ever could. Her stillness becomes her sword. When a woman chooses silence, it's not because she's defeated. It's because she's discerning. She's learned the hard way that not every situation deserves her energy. Not every battle is worth her breath. She doesn't entertain chaos. She doesn't waste time on explanations for people committed to misunderstanding her. That's silence. That's not weakness. It's strategy. It's preservation. It's power. In her silence, she observes. She studies the patterns, the motives, the truths that loud voices try to hide. She watches how people treat her when she's no longer performing for their comfort. That quiet creates space for clarity, for decision, for movement that is deliberate and unstoppable. You see, the most dangerous woman is not the one yelling. It's the one who smiles, nods, then walks away without a word, because you'll never see her coming again. She doesn't react to insults, accusations, or manipulation. Her silence is a boundary. It says, I heard you, I just don't need to respond. That level of control is rare. It makes people uncomfortable. They don't know how to handle a woman who won't engage in emotional warfare. They can't dominate someone who won't argue. Her silence frustrates those who relied on her validation to feel powerful. But this silence, it isn't cold. It's not spiteful. It's sacred. It's a woman honoring her peace above all else. When she goes quiet, it means she's shifted her focus back to herself. She stopped pouring into broken places. She stopped convincing others of her worth. She knows who she is now, and that truth doesn't need defending. In relationships, this silence can be the end of enabling and the beginning of self-respect. In careers, it's the refusal to be undermined or underestimated. In life, it's the firm decision to walk away from anything that doesn't serve her growth. And in every case, her silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to the world exactly how little noise she needs to make to command attention. Because at the end of the day, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it simply leaves. And when a woman chooses silence over chaos, she isn't disappearing. She's rising, quietly, powerfully, on her own terms. The silence that shakes the world. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean weakness, defeat, or retreat. It means mastery. It means that a woman has grown past the need to convince anyone of anything. In this kind of silence, there is no screaming, no proving, no pleading, only pure, unshakable presence. That silence becomes her thunder. That silence becomes her resistance. And that silence over time reshapes the world around her. When a woman chooses silence, it is not because she lacks a response. It's because she has chosen not to waste her energy where it won't be valued. She could speak, she could argue, she could fire back. But she doesn't, because she knows her worth is not proven in the noise. It's proven in her ability to stand still, to stand tall, and to remain centered when everything around her tries to provoke her into chaos. You see, the world doesn't know what to do with a woman who doesn't react, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't rush to defend herself. A woman who chooses silence disarms the chaos. Her refusal to engage becomes her rebellion. Her calm becomes her protest. Her composure becomes a mirror that forces others to see themselves loud, reckless, insecure, while she remains unmoved. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's powerful. It's the silence of queens, of wise women, of those who have walked through fire and chosen not to let it burn their soul. It's the silence of mothers who have learned patience through pain. It's the silence of leaders who listen before they speak. It's the silence of warriors who understand that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. It's the one that doesn't need to raise at all. When a woman sits in her silence and lets others expose themselves through their own noise, she's practicing an ancient kind of power. A sacred strength that doesn't need to be understood by everyone, only by those wise enough to recognize it. She doesn't silence others, she simply chooses not to respond. And that choice often speaks louder than any words ever could. The world underestimates this silence, but it feels it. You can feel the energy shift when a woman stops explaining, stops apologizing, stops chasing. There's a tension in the air because the game has changed, the power has shifted, and now her silence is the spotlight revealing what was hidden all along. That's the moment when silence becomes dangerous, when it becomes revolutionary, when it says, you no longer get to access my voice, you no longer get to consume my energy. I've withdrawn, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And in that silence, she rises. Not because she's hiding, but because she's awakening. Her silence isn't absence, it's preparation. When a woman grows silent, the world often mistakes her quiet for withdrawal, for disappearance, for defeat, but they misunderstand her completely. Her silence is not a retreat from the world, it's a re-entry on her own terms. In that stillness, she's not shrinking, she's recharging, she's not vanishing, she's calculating, she's learning, gathering, sharpening the tools she needs for what comes next. Silence is preparation, the kind that builds a foundation under her feet, brick by invisible brick. While others speak to be heard, she listens to understand. While the world rushes to react, she waits to respond with wisdom. This is a kind of preparation that doesn't seek applause, it seeks precision. She knows that strength isn't always loud, that real transformation doesn't come with noise, but with clarity. Think of the seasons. Winter is quiet, yet beneath the frozen surface, life is preparing for spring. Roots grow deeper, soil becomes richer. The visible world may seem lifeless, but below, there's movement. That's how her silence works. It deepens her soul, it strengthens her resolve, it clears her mind. She's aligning with her purpose. She's making peace with her past. She's making space for her future. And when she reappears, she doesn't have to explain where she went. She doesn't owe the world a rundown of her healing, her work, her reflection. Her presence will say everything. The new light in her eyes, the boundaries that can't be crossed anymore. The way she carries herself with quiet certainty. That's how you'll know she didn't disappear. She evolved. Her silence was a cocoon. Now she's ready to fly. So never assume silence means nothing is happening. In a woman's quiet, empires are being built. In her stillness, direction is being found. She's done explaining herself. She's done asking for permission. She is preparing for a life aligned with her value, not her fears. And when she steps forward again, she won't walk, she'll rise. Because a woman who understands the power of her silence is a woman the world can no longer control. Her silence is the storm she survived and the strength she became. They never noticed her when she spoke gently. They ignored her warnings. They talked over her wisdom. They tried to shrink her spirit with noise, with criticism, with doubt. And when she fell silent, they thought they had won. But they didn't realize they had awakened something deeper. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. It was the calm after the storm she had weathered alone. It was the breath she held during the chaos. It was the space she carved out to hear her own voice again. And in that silence, she remembered everything. Every time she was overlooked, every time her voice was dismissed, every time her kindness was mistaken for weakness. She used that silence not to escape, but to rebuild. A woman who grows strong in silence becomes unstoppable. She no longer seeks validation from those who misunderstood her pain. She no longer chases people who only listened when she screamed. She walks differently now, grounded, whole, and with a sense of self that no one can take from her. The same silence they once mocked has now become her shield. It protects her peace. It filters out the noise of the world and keeps her grounded in her truth. It teaches her to respond, not react, to pause, not panic, to rise, not retaliate. Because now she knows she doesn't need to shout to be heard. She doesn't need to explain to be understood. Her actions, her energy, her presence, they speak louder than words ever could. And those who underestimated her silence, they'll feel it when she moves on without a goodbye. They'll notice it in the things she no longer tolerates. They'll hear it in the doors she closes, the boundaries she draws, and the life she builds in peace, not permission. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a transformation. A sacred space where she found her voice, even when she wasn't speaking. Neng. And now she moves with intention, not to prove anything, but because she finally understands her worth. A woman's silence is never empty. It is full of wisdom, full of healing, full of unshakable power. Because the woman who walks away in silence is the same woman who comes back stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever. They thought her silence meant she had nothing to say, that she was defeated, that she had backed down, disappeared, given up. But what they didn't know was this. In her silence, she was rewriting the story. She was healing. She was building something powerful. And now, the woman who once stayed quiet is the woman who walks in peace, clarity, and unshakable strength. Her silence wasn't the absence of power. It was the preparation for it. Too often society tells women they must be loud to be taken seriously, that they must explain, argue, prove, and fight for their space. But a woman who has stepped into her power knows true strength isn't always loud. It's in restraint, in the ability to walk away instead of explode, to observe instead of react, to choose peace over petty battles. Her silence speaks volumes because it's intentional. This is the power of a woman who has evolved. She no longer entertains chaos. She no longer justifies her decisions to those who refuse to understand her. She no longer wastes time convincing others of her worth. She's done explaining, done apologizing, done shrinking. Her silence now speaks with the authority of someone who's been through fire and emerged refined, not burned. Let this be a message to every woman listening. Your silence is not something to be ashamed of. It's not emptiness. It's not defeat. It is a choice, a powerful one. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't deserve your words, you reclaim your energy. When you stop responding to every opinion thrown your way, you rise above the noise. There is wisdom in your silence. It is the space where you rediscover your voice, where you choose what deserves your energy and what doesn't, where you learn to listen to your intuition and make decisions rooted in strength, not desperation. It's where you prepare for the next chapter, not to impress, not to prove, be. To live fully and freely. You are not voiceless. You are powerful beyond measure. And to the world that underestimated you when you went quiet, let them watch what you build in peace. Let them feel your absence. Let them wonder how they lost the very woman who once gave them access to her soul. Your silence is your power. Your peace is your armor. Your self-respect is your voice. So now walk with your head high, not because you shouted the loudest, but because you stood the strongest. You didn't crumble. You didn't fold. You didn't break. You chose you, quietly, completely, without asking for permission. That is your victory. That is your power. And that is the legacy of a woman who chose silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she finally knew who she was. Let the world adjust to your silence, because your silence was always your roar.